One of the first lessons that I learned once I really started doing projects, and also one of the biggest surprises that I had, was the realization that the relationship between the size of the project you're doing and the amount of work that you have to put into it isn't linear. And if you think about that, it can't be, because broadly, everybody's got 24 hours in a day. Some people do big projects, some people do smaller projects, but everybody's only got 24 hours. So you must be able to do big projects with the same amount of work, in a certain sense, as smaller projects. And so the relationship between the size of the project you're doing and the amount of work that you're putting in isn't linear. You can do big projects with just the same amount of work as you do smaller projects. And of course, when we're all starting out, we think about what's a manageable level kind of project for us to accomplish, because maybe we're working by ourselves or working with a very small team of people. And of course, that's very important to realize what you can produce as you get started. But then as you start to go from there, then you realize, wait a minute, we can do this bigger, we can do larger things, we can undertake larger things, and they're not going to consume more work or require a whole lot more work on our time. Because we tend to think, let's say I'm going to do work here in red, and then I'm going to do size of project here in black. Go ahead and use the paper I've got here. And so people think, well, I'm just going to do a small project because that's manageable. So we're going to do, the amount of work and also the size of the project is increasing as we go up. So you're going to do a small project, and that's going to require some amount of work right here. So size of project and the amount of work required. And then you think that, well, now, gee, if I want to do a really big project, here's the size of my project, that I'm going to need a lot of work. So it's maybe the relationship between work and size of the project goes something like this. But this really isn't the case. Whenever you undertake a project, there's going to be a minimum amount of work that you have to do. So I'm just going to put this bar right here, which is going to represent the minimum amount of work that's required to undertake any kind of project. This does mean that you have to be careful about what projects you undertake. You can't do that casually, because there's always, as soon as you commit to one, you're committing to a certain amount of work. That's the same amount of work in order to complete the project, whether it's a big project, whether it's a little project, whether it's a big hit, whether it's a small hit, or just get by, you're going to be in for a certain amount of work. And so let's say you're going to go do crowdfunding. And so you say you're going to do a book, a film, a board game, whatever it is that you're doing. And so you commit yourself to X amount of work in order to get that project done. And you say, I want to fund it with, let's say you want to fund it with 100 backers. You want to go get 100 people. And so the project is, this size, okay, right here. So they're roughly equivalent. But then you realize that you've got a minimum product order. If you're doing a physical product, you're going to require, the manufacturer is going to require a minimum order from you in order to do the project at all. It might be 1,000 units, might be 1,500 units. Tech projects are probably more, might be 5,000 or 10,000 units. So you realize I'm in for this amount of work, regardless of the number of people who actually come and back this campaign and make it big. So we've got two different things here. We've got an option of having a big project or a small project, and it's the same amount of work. Okay? It doesn't matter. Once you get to your crowdfunding campaign, whether or not 100 people come or whether or not 5,000 people come, you're committed to getting this whole project done and getting all of these items manufactured. So you're in for a certain amount of work, and you realize, wait a minute, I can have more people and do the exact same amount of work. Now, it's not perfect. The more people that you do come on board does require some more work, but it's not anything near linear. Once you get to very high, because suppose you're doing shipping and you're sorting spreadsheets, because you've got to get all of your products to people, and you've got to sort all these spreadsheets to make sure that you get it to your shipping partners. Well, if you've got 10 people on the spreadsheet, doing that takes the same amount of time as having 100 or 1,000. So you can get your products to more people without doing an appreciable more amount of work. Now, so we're looking at something, this is the minimum amount of work, whether I'm doing a project of this size, or the project ends up this size, or the project ends up this size. Now, it's not perfect because largely of the human element. Because if you are designing a board game, for instance, even if you have to manufacture more, you design the board game, you submit all the files to the manufacturer, whether or not you place an order for 1,000 board games, or you place an order for 5,000 or 10,000 or 50,000, the amount of work you had to do as the creative person on getting all the files ready is exactly the same. You just place a larger order. But let's say once you get up here, it does require some more work. And then in order to get to this level, it requires a little bit more work. And a lot of this increase right here is largely the human element, which are things like customer service. You're going to find that things that making sure that your backers have a great experience, making sure that your customers have a great experience if you're doing e-commerce, working with people, the more people you have to work with, you have this increase here. But it's not, you're not adding 1 unit of work for every unit of a size of your project. You're adding many more units of size of the project onto the amount of work that you're having to do, or many more units of size of the project for much smaller amounts of work that you're having to do. That's fantastic that the world works that way, because that's going to allow you to scale. And so it also means that you can think bigger. Go ahead and think bigger, because once you realize you're in for a certain amount of work, go ahead and maximize the size of the project for the amount of work that you're going to be putting in. And so realize that just working, you're not going to have to work longer and longer hours and harder and harder and harder and harder to make this much bigger. I know people who are basically one-person operations, and they run very large operations. Now, of course, they have contractors they work with and all of this, but they do all much larger amounts of revenue. They do much larger projects. They're doing these things, and it's still just one person working from their condo. Well, how are they doing that? So it can't possibly have been just that they, work 45 hours a day, because that's impossible. You can't keep adding on units of work to make these units of your project larger. So I hope that's given you a new way to think about this and the relationship between work and then the size and scope of the project that you're going to be doing. If